All right, where we've started the book of Samuel, the first book of Samuel, and we're coming out of Judges. And when we left Judges in those last few chapters, last 3 chapters, the writer mentioned 3 times about explaining why Israel was in the chaotic state they were in. And do you remember what the writer of Judges said to explain Israel's problem?
They didn't have a king.
They didn't have a king. He says it 3 times. This wasn't a time, and everybody did what they pleased, what they wanted to do. Okay, so we want to always keep that in the back of mind because that's a big theme when we look at the books of Samuel. Now, we started the book last week and we had some characters introduced right at the beginning. And who were some of the characters that we saw in the first 3 chapters of
Samuel?
Okay, one obviously Samuel. And tell me Samuel's story. What's his background?
His mother couldn't have a child.
Okay, his mother couldn't have a child,
Yeah.
and his mother's name was, you remember? Hannah. Hannah couldn't have a child, and she
dedicated Samuel to
okay.
God.
When she goes to pray to God, she dedicates, and she goes to Shiloh, to the tent,
Yeah.
The tabernacle. And who was at the tabernacle when she goes? Who was working in the tabernacle? The head priest, the guy's in charge. Eli is in charge of the tabernacle. And she goes and she prays and they go once a year, Elkanah and Hannah and his other wife. And she prays, and Eli assumes she's been drinking, right? Because she's saying a prayer, her lips are moving but it's silent, and he thinks she's buzzed.
Yeah.
She says she's not, she's praying, and Eli says, you're going to have a child, and what God's going to respond, the Lord's going to respond, and he does, and she has a child, and she names him Samuel, because God has heard her. But dedicates Samuel, and when she dedicated Samuel, she wasn't messing around, right? Mm-hmm. She wasn't fooling around. When she dedicated Samuel, what did that dedication mean?
That he was with God all the time. I mean, he was taken away from her, basically.
That's right. Well, one, he's going to be a Nazirite, and we know about Nazirites because we've already dealt with another one in the book of Judges named Samson, and Nazirites are described in Leviticus what they do. And so we've run across one who wasn't a great example of a spiritual person, but he's going to be raised as a Nazirite, not going to get his hair cut, not going to eat anything related to grapes or drink anything related to grapes. And that's his lifestyle. And she also gives him to the Lord,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
And she does this by doing what?
Takes him to
Shiloh and presents him to Eli and says,
here,
he's yours. And I'll tell you, I can't tell you how many times that happens here on like a weekly basis. Somebody brings their child and says, please take them. Of course, usually they're, sometimes they're in their teens, usually they're teenagers, and we don't really want them, so we send them back. But she actually, so Eli has Samuel, right? And he's raising Samuel. Now, Eli has other kids, right? He has 2 boys. And what's the issue with the 2 boys?
They're not very nice.
Oh, they're
awful.
awful.
Trouble.
Oh, they're awful.
Yeah.
They're terrible. And they do terrible things. And in particular, they highlight one that the writer thinks is particularly bad. And what are they doing? And remember, they're priests.
They steal from the people.
They steal from the people. What do they steal from the people? Which is really bad. It's one thing to steal. What are they stealing from the people?
Raw meat.
And why is that significant? The sacrifice. People bring sacrifices, and They say, don't sacrifice your animal, give us. We're gonna eat it. And they have their own, and that's awful. Because that's their job, is to sacrifice. And Eli is upset, right? And he chews them out, but he doesn't do anything else. And what happens with respect to Eli and the two boys? Well, what do they hear? What does Eli hear is going to happen to himself? Okay, the two boys are going to die same day, and his descendants are not going to be priests anymore. Okay, now you got those two boys that are just trouble. I mean, they're just trouble. In contrast to Samuel, and what is Samuel? How is Samuel described?
Well-behaved.
He's well behaved, and what does his mom do? Makes a little ephod for him every year, and brings it, a little apron for him to wear, and he's so cute wearing that apron. He's well respected, and it talks about at the beginning of chapter 4 that the word of the Lord is coming through Samuel, right? And Samuel seems to be will function as a prophet. Now, important to pause for just a minute. When we run into prophet in the Old Testament, we are not talking about someone who predicts the future. That's the way, we said a little while ago, sometimes when you translate from one language to another, not only do you have to be aware of the word, but you have to be aware of how the word is defined now. Because certain words may mean something in English 300 years ago, but they don't mean that same thing now. That's the challenge of reading the King James. Not that the King James isn't beautiful, but language has changed. Mm-hmm. And so you're not struggling with the Greek, you're struggling with understanding the English, because the English used in 1610 isn't the same as English spoken, in 2010. There's been a development in 400 years. And so that's becomes confusing. The English becomes confusing. Prophet is one of those things that may be confusing nowadays, because we think of a prophet as someone who predicts the future, particularly in the church. Because most of the time when we talk about the prophets, what are the prophets saying? In the church, when do we really focus on the prophets? What message from the prophets do we tend to focus on?
It's about God.
About Jesus. We usually look at the prophets and say, what do the prophets say about Jesus? Therefore, Isaiah was doing what? Predicting the coming of Jesus. And that's what we tend to focus on. Understand that that's not what they meant in the time when it was written. Prophets weren't, and even when Paul talks about some people have the gift of prophecy, he's not talking about the ability to see the future. What a prophet did is a prophet looked at situations, knew the law, knew the word, and could draw implications from the situations he saw, or she saw, because Deborah was a prophet. They could draw implications. Now, is that predicting the future? Well, kinda. But it's like an advisor. If I'm advising the governor and he asks, should I raise taxes? And I say, if you raise taxes, it's going to cost you support in these areas. Am I predicting the future? Well, sort of. But it's not like, I've got a vision. I see, I see a handsome young man coming. That's not what a prophet does. That's what a seer does. And we're supposed to be careful of seers. Prophets are the ones who can draw. So kings surrounded themselves with prophets, what they considered prophets, because they were advisors to the kings, and there were schools that taught people how to be prophets. They taught them what the word said. They taught them, how to interpret information. That's what prophets did. And so that's what Samuel is doing. He's not a seer who goes into visions and can envision the future. He's telling the people the implications of that behavior. Okay, so that's the role he's playing. Now, that we've got right at the beginning of chapter 4. So we've got Samuel, respected, functioning as a prophet. Now, when we look in chapter 4, verse 2, what is happening in Israel as all this other stuff is going on?
But there's the Philistines.
Okay, we got Philistines. Now, we've seen Philistines before, right? When did we run into Philistines?
Back a ways.
Back a ways. Whoa, yeah, back a ways. That's good. Yeah, Philistines are back a ways. Who were? When in the prior time did we run into Philistines? With whom did we associate Philistines?
You think of David and Goliath?
Okay, now David and Goliath, that's jumping ahead.
Yeah.
So that they're going to still play a role in the story. But they played a role in the story before. When did we see them before in this story?
That whenever they were looking to cross their land, were they trying to, when they left Egypt?
Wasn't when they left Egypt? The Philistines lived right on the coast. Right on the coast. They were connected ethnically with Phoenicians. If you've ever ancient history, Phoenicians were a major trading nation around Tyre and Sidon. Settled Carthage further west, but the Phoenicians were related to them. They were coastal people, trading people. Wasn't when they were entering the land. It was in the book of Judges. Samson and the Philistines. That was all about the Philistines. And remember, one of the things when we looked at the Samson story as a judge that was different, several differences in the Samson's as judge. One, he never leads the people. Samson never led an army of Israelites. And at the end of the Samson story, even though he brought down the temple on a whole bunch of Philistine leaders, their power is never broken. All the other judges defeat these what they call foreigners in the land. Of course, it was their land first. So they were people of the land, other people in the land. They're always defeated, and Israel has a time of peace. In the Samson story, the Philistines are never defeated. They are still in the land, in that promised land given. Actually, the land of the Philistines were really close to Gaza now. That's big in the news now. Gaza that's sort of the same area that the Philistines lived along the coast. So the Philistines are there, they're present, and they are causing havoc. They're causing trouble.
They want to arrest Samson or take Samson.
Well, that was in the Samson story. They took him and Samson they did, and Delilah fooled him, and she tied him to the pillars of the temple, and he pulls the pillars down, and the story ends. He dies, the leaders die, but the Philistines are still there. And so as we enter the 4th chapter of 1 Samuel, the Philistines are still present in the land. And in 1 Samuel, what are they planning to do? In chapter 4.
They capture the ark?
Well, we're not there yet. Even before they do that, because capturing the ark is going to be an interesting part of the story. What do they do right at the beginning of chapter 4? What are they doing?
They
went out to
deployed
fight
their
against the
forces.
Philistines.
Okay.
Ready to fight.
Fight who?
The Philistines.
Israel.
Israelites. So you got Israelites on one side, Philistines on the other. Now, kind of interesting because he describes them as Israelites, which is different than we saw in Judges, where you had regional wars where you had just tribes. They would call 3 tribes together and they put on an army and fight because it was the problem was in a certain area. Here we're talking about all of Israel. So does that reflect a change in the sources of the story? Well, maybe, since the redactor is putting together these ancient stories. So maybe. Does it show that he's shaping them in a different way? Well, maybe. He wants this to be a message to all of Israel rather than a piece of Israel. Really don't know the intention, but that's a little different than we saw in Judges. Okay, so the Philistines are going to fight the Israelites, and when they fight the Israelites, they go to battle. What happens?
The Israelites lost.
The Israelites lost. And is it a close loss?
No.
No, it's not a close loss. They get creamed. They just get creamed. Now, after the battle, what do the elders of Israel do?
They brought the ark.
Okay, well, they're meeting, right?
Yeah.
They get together. And it's really interesting as they start talking about this battle. What is it that what kind of conclusions do they come to?
They think if they take the Ark of the Covenant with them, the Lord will.
Okay.
They think the Lord brought God.
Okay,
Yeah.
they're saying, at first, the first thing they say is, the Lord caused this to happen. Which is interesting, because that infers what? If the elders are saying, the Lord caused us to lose, what does that suggest?
But they're not doing something
That
right.
And they're not doing something right, and they know it, right? So if the Lord has done it, it shows a certain amount of faith in God, right? If they said, we don't know why we lost, or we didn't have enough men, or the strategy was bad, or Philistines are too strong, that'd be different. But they said the Lord caused this rout to occur. And so we've got, again, breaking this Judges pattern. Because in the book of Judges, Israel was bad, enslaved, cried to the Lord, judge, defeats the enemy, Israel lives at peace, and then drifts back into sinning. That's not the case here, because they recognize that the Lord caused them to lose this battle. Now, how they interpret it's going to change in a couple of chapters. But we're not worried about that now. So we're talking about a different kind of story than what we saw in the Judges, because the elders seem to be demonstrating some kind of faith, so maybe something else is going on in here. And so they decide, if they want the Lord to be with them in this battle, the next battle, they need to do what?
Take the covenant.
They need to take the Ark of the Covenant. Now, what is the Ark of the Covenant?
It's the Lord.
And we know that because we saw Indiana Jones. We saw Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Yeah.
We know what the Ark of the Covenant is, right? What is the Ark of the Covenant?
It's like
The
God's.
law.
What's that?
The law.
Well, it contains the law, the tablets.
Ten Commandments.
That's right, contains the Ten Commandments, contains some other
And
things.
it's just God's.
It's sacred.
Yeah, it's sacred. What makes it sacred? Now, that's you used an interesting word, because sacred means what? What does sacred mean?
Holy.
It means holy. What does holy mean?
Godly.
Godly. It reflects, it's set aside, it's something that reflects God. In fact, as they described it, and understand they're using metaphor and images, they viewed the ark as like the stool on which God either sat or put his feet. So the ark represents the presence of God. Where the ark was, you could be sure God was present. And so it contained the Ten Commandments, but it also contained, if you remember, Aaron's stick that turned into a snake, and it contained a jar of the manna that they had in the wilderness. So it contained these sacred things that God had provided them. Were all in this ark. And it was designed in a certain way with cherubim with wings touching, and so it was this elaborate thing, and very detailed on how it needed to be covered. And remember, the ark is the one that led them across the Jordan, when Joshua conquered the land. So
Two men were with them all the time.
that's exactly right, and they had to be Levites, so you just couldn't get any Joe to carry it. And so they're going to bring the ark. This is going to guarantee that God is going to be with them in this battle. And if God is going to be with them in this battle, then they will win. Okay. Now, so they get the ark, right? And they go to Shiloh, because the ark is there with the tent, and the tent's in Shiloh. And naturally, who brings the ark?
Priest.
You got two priests that are bringing the ark, because you need to have priests bringing the ark. And who are the two priests that bring the ark?
Eli's two sons.
Oh my, Eli's two sons. Eli, why isn't Eli there?
He's old.
He's old. And we even saw that in the Samuel story. Remember when God talked to Samuel, Eli was no longer, he wasn't seeing very well, he was old. And so we know that. His two boys come. Now, we know something about the two boys. One, they are
Bad.
rotten,
Yes.
right? We also know what?
They're gonna die.
They're going to die, and they're going to die
On the
same day. So we already know that. So they bring the ark. The army says, hot dog. And when they say hot dog, only they say it in Hebrew, and it's kosher. What they say it
And
loudly. So they're saying hot dog, hot
Yeah.
dog. And who hears them?
The Philistines.
The Philistines hear them. And what goes on in the Philistine camp?
They find out eventually that
The ark is in the covenant,
And they're scared.
and the Philistines are scared because
God did all those other towns and killed all those other people, and
right, if God is with the Israelites, then we are in
trouble.
We are in big trouble. We are in big trouble, and kind of gives a little history. Now we've seen this before, where the enemy hears this and is afraid. And every time it's happened before, when the Israelites are going to go out to fight a battle, and the enemy is filled with fear in their camp, what inevitably happens?
They win.
Well, who wins?
Israelites.
Israelites win. Every time. Israelites.
Yeah.
This is part of God causing confusion in the enemy camp. So next battle, we'll kind of set up for an Israelite victory, right? But what happens in the next battle?
They lose.
They lose, and if they lose
Badly.
big time. Big time. Florida State, Georgia kind of loss. It is horrible. It is a rout. Tens of thousands of people end up dying, including
The two boys.
the two boys. So the prediction has been correct.
How do you say that first one? H-O-P. Pronounce that.
Happening.
Hopping.
But they're gone.
Yeah.
Those are gone. So now what else happens as a result of this battle?
Well, they go to tell Eli.
Well, even before they go and tell Eli, what happens in the battle? The two boys are dead. Hophni and Phinehas are gone.
The ark was captured.
The ark is captured by the Philistines. The thing that shows the presence of God has been captured by the Philistines. So theologically, this is a big, big deal. And you said, what then happens? Guy from the battle does
He
what?
runs back to tell Eli.
Runs back and tells Eli.
Eli.
Okay. And what is Eli doing?
He's sitting in a chair.
Okay,
and
he's
he falls over
just
dead.
sitting in a chair watching, right?
Yep.
Because his job his whole life has been to do what? What has been his job? He's a priest, right?
Yeah.
What's his job? Offer sacrifices. To offer sacrifices, you got to have an altar. You got to have the tabernacle. And what is in the center of the tabernacle? Ark of the Covenant. So you need that Ark of the Covenant. That was his whole life is dedicated to ensure worship and protect the Ark. And the Ark he saw move out away from its place into battle, and so he is sweating. He's nervous. He's sweating out whether the ark is going to come back. And the guy runs back from the battle. And what is the message?
That his two sons were killed.
Okay, that he tells Eli, your two boys are dead. Well, and Eli hears kind of an uproar in the city because the guy ran back. And understand, this is the way you communicate. That's what happened after the Battle of Marathon in Greece. The guy ran back to the city and announced that the Persians were defeated. That's what this guy's job is to do. Only they say he fled the battle. His job is to tell the people whether it's victory or not. And we lost. And we lost big. Eli, your two boys are dead. And
The Ark of the Covenant.
the Ark of the Covenant has been taken.
And he fell.
And
dead.
yes, now the two boys, he can handle,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
You know, there's no he's handling the death of his sons, right? But when he hears the ark has been taken, what happens to him?
Dies. Also
He
that's it.
falls over backwards and he
Dies.
breaks his neck and he dies. And the writer reminds us that Eli has been doing what?
The leader for 40
He's been a leader. He's been the leader for 40 years. So, situation in Israel, right? What's going on in Israel? Right at this point.
No leadership.
You got no leader because Eli is now gone. What else? So the leadership is taken out. What else has been taken out?
God.
God has been taken out. How has God been taken out?
The ark.
The ark is gone. So Israel is in chaos. Now, interesting again, they talk about Israel. So we're moving, we're in a time now where the writer is seeing the 12 tribes as sort of a unity, which we didn't see in Judges at all. We saw in Joshua, but we didn't see in Judges. We're seeing that now, here.
Any reason that he grew to the fact that it was a Benjamite who ran back to offer the communication?
Well, now, think about it. There could be a reason both looking back and looking forward. Looking back, when did we last encounter Benjaminites?
They were, that's where they left. The man and the woman left the tribe of Benjamin, and the concubine that was killed.
You're right. And so the Benjaminites were not portrayed as
Good people.
good people at all. In fact, they were awful people. And the only way they survived is by this horrible thing that the other tribes did, by capturing women and dragging them back to mate with Benjaminites so the tribe would disappear. Now, if that's what he's thinking about, the fact that, and I think that's something you look for when you're looking at scripture, because the writer doesn't have to identify it. You know, he's choosing to do that. If he's looking back, what might he be saying about this messenger and the situation?
They're back in the fold, the Benjamite.
Okay, could be the back of the fold. How is though this guy described? What does he say? How does the writer describe this Benjaminite?
His clothes torn and dust on his head.
Yeah, well, which means he's doing what? If he's got dust on his head.
Fighting for the...
Running.
What does dust, because we run into it in the New Testament. Described in the New Testament, we see it a lot in the Old Testament. When does one put, and we see it in Job, in the first chapter of Job, when do people put dust and ashes on their
Somebody
head?
dies.
When they say, as a sign of what?
Morning.
As a sign of mourning, a sign of grief. So dust on your head, that's a sign of
Yeah, that's
grief.
what I was doing.
So this Benjaminite is feeling grief at what's happened. It's not that he's had a dusty ride and he's just dirty. You know, this is grief because he recognizes what's occurred. He also is described as somebody who fled from the battle. So somebody fleeing from the battle, how do you look at that? Is that a sign of courage? Is that a sign of weakness? He's not portrayed necessarily by one who runs from the battle, because he runs from that and Eli still asks him, well, who won? It's not like, well, you ran from the battle, we must have lost. There's still a question about who won. So he's not viewed, certainly by Eli, as someone who is brave. You know, you ran away from the battle, but did we win? You know, and of course they lost. So if he's looking back, that might explain why he's not portrayed necessarily as super positive, as sort of if somebody's going to run away from this battle, it wouldn't be a shock that it would be someone from the tribe of Benjamin. You know, that wouldn't be a shocker. Could be that they're kind of coming together, particularly if we're looking forward, because in the next week, we're going to be looking at somebody else from the tribe of Benjamin, who's going to become really important. And his name is going to be Saul, who's going to end up being the king. So looking ahead, Benjamin is going to play a real positive role in the future. Now, is that looking ahead to the future? Is it looking back to the past? Are we supposed to see Benjaminite and go, Benjaminite, that can't be good? Or do we look at it and say, Benjaminite, maybe they're going to play a role in the story to come? I don't know, but I think you could take it in either direction. What I would suggest that we not do is read it and assume, it doesn't mean anything. He's just throwing it in there. Because if you start trying to interpret Scripture by taking that perspective, then you can say that about anything that's hard and challenging. Well, it just doesn't mean anything. Well, it does. We may not understand it, but it probably is. There's a reason he's doing it. So I think looking at the context, it could go in either direction. But certainly that's who he was. And Eli is now dead, right?
Yeah.
Now, but then the writer includes an interesting little story that again he doesn't need to include. Because with the boys dead and Eli dead, remember the prediction was your sons are going to die in the same day. Mm-hmm. You're going to die, like duh, of course you're going to die. And your descendants aren't going to be priests anymore. We're going to shift, even though it was way back, all the way back to Aaron. Your descendants aren't going to be priests anymore. Then we got this little interesting story
About the daughter-in-law.
about the daughter-in-law who is pregnant.
Yes.
And it really doesn't play any role now, but it may play a role later. Because we've got a daughter-in-law who is pregnant, right? Mm-hmm. Here's her husband is dead, right? But what happens with her? She goes into labor, has a son, then she dies, but her son Ichabod.
All I think of is Ichabod Crane.
Yeah, Ichabod lives. Mm-hmm. So we might expect somewhere in the story Ichabod, and then we shift to something else. So there's a reason he's introduced it. We may see Ichabod later in the story. Maybe he'll be a major character, maybe he won't. But we can be pretty sure he's just not throwing this out as nice to know information. Okay, so we've got that. Now we go back to the Philistines and the ark, right? All right, and what's the deal with the Philistines in chapter 5 with the Philistines and the ark? Because they've captured this ark, the ark.
It's causing them all to get like sores and boils and.
They moved it too.
Well, right at the beginning,
Yeah.
before it infects them, they move it, right? Because they got, and where do they move? Because they got now this ark, that they know, because remember they were scared because the ark was now in the camp and the Israelites were encouraged by it. And it's important to recognize that these ancient people, they aren't monotheists. So the Philistines, they don't believe in one God. They have no trouble believing in a lot of gods. So their God is just one of many. Their God may protect them, but they would never suggest that theirs is the only God. No other God exists. And so if you have this thing that represents presence of another God, that's fine. You got no trouble moving that into a temple. That's the Romans built in the city of Rome a huge temple that they named, the name of the temple that they built right in the center of Rome. It still stands, still there. They gave the temple a name. They called it the Pantheon. The Pantheon. What does the word Pantheon mean?
I don't know.
Pantheon means all gods. That's what it means in Greek. Pantheon means all gods. And that was a temple for what? All gods. Not all Roman gods. All gods. So you'd have altars. It was built so you could have everybody in the Roman, everybody worshipped in the Roman Empire could have an altar in the Pantheon, because that's the place for all gods. And so that's kind of the mindset. So they have no trouble believing that the God of Israel, this unnamed God that the Israelites won't even give the name, that's a deity, but it's a deity right along with Dagon. Their God, the God that kind of protects and guides them. Okay, so they take the ark and they put it in Dagon's temple, right? And right there. Now, what happens in that temple?
Their God, Dagon falls off.
Okay, he falls, this idol falls down. But it's not just falling down, because the writer tells us it seems more significant, at least as he writes it, it's more significant. What does it appear as though the idol is doing? Bowing down. Even though it may have fallen, as he even describes it, he is bowing down before the Ark of the Covenant, right? Okay, and what do the Philistines do?
Put 'em back up.
They put him back up, right? And they put him back up, and then the next morning they come in and he's down again, only this time,
He is broken.
okay, he's broken. His head is gone and his arms are there someplace else, right at the front of the temple, and it's just his torso is there in front of the Ark of the Covenant, right? And the writer says, what does the writer tell us? Which every now and then he'll do it, because it is a reminder that he is writing to a people much later.
Tells them why the priest won't step on the threshold.
They won't pass the threshold because of this.
To this day.
To this day. So, and Ashdod is a city on the coast, and it's, viewed as foreign, and that's where they're sort of the center of Philistine culture. You can't really call it a capital because you have a different, countries are different then. So, but that's sort of the center of Philistine culture, the big city, and that's the way it is right now. Now, that's a problem, but the bigger problem comes when shows, and what is this showing about? And this is a not so subtle way the writer is telling us what, or telling his audience what. What is in this little story about the statue of Dagon? What is the writer telling us? The God of Israel, this God represented by the ark, he's in control. He's in control and has power. Now, the problem, and it doesn't seem like that's a big issue for the people of Ashdod. What does become a big issue for them?
They get tumors.
They start getting really sick.
Yes.
They start getting these tumors, right? And to what do they attribute?
Because the ark is there.
Because the ark is there.
So God's bringing it upon them.
Okay, that God is bringing. Now again, like I said, they are not monotheists. It's not like they have now converted to the God of Israel. They are still worshipers of Dagon. It's just the God of Israel is causing this to happen. And so what do they decide to do?
They work because they can't stay there, continue to bring on that.
Yeah, they can't come and continue to bring this plague. So we got to get this ark and this foreign god, what? Out of town. Now, who volunteers as they have this meeting? We got to get it out of Ashdod. A town steps forward, right? And what town steps forward to take the ark? Gath will take the ark. Now, why would they want this ark?
I don't know.
They probably thought God would be with them.
It would be, if you've got different gods, you'd worship, didn't worship one god, they worshiped a whole bunch of gods at the same time, because different gods had different responsibilities. So if this God is that powerful, it can't necessarily be bad for God, to have the presence of this God there. So the people of Gath end up deciding to take the ark off of Ashdod's hands. And I'm thinking of it like a used car salesman. The people of Ashdod say, "Oh yeah, this ark. Oh yeah, it's really good. We don't want to part with it, but I guess you could talk us out of it." And so they haul it to Gath. And what happens in Gath?
The Lord's hand is against them again.
You got a problem. The same sort of thing. They end up getting tumors. And so what do they do
They sent it to Ekron.
Keeps on getting passed down. You know, they go to Ekron, and what happens when in Ekron?
They were
They-
afraid that they were gonna be killed when
Yeah.
they got to town.
Don't do this.
Yes.
You know, don't send it here, because if bad things have happened in other places, bad things are gonna happen here. And so what do they decide?
They wanted to go back to its original place.
Okay, we needed to send the ark back. You know, we want to send the ark back. Now, what does all this show? Because the writer's going into all this detail. What is this showing about
God is still in
God? And it's the God represented by this ark. This is the God who's in control. Now, why is that so important that the writer or the redactor of this story, the one who's shaping it into a narrative, why is that so important that he wants his audience to believe? Because he is like bludgeoning them.
Because there's
with
only
this.
one God, and that's who you're, one God is who you're supposed to
Okay.
Worship other idols.
You can't worship other gods. This is the God of Israel is above all other gods. Now, how long has the ark been with the Philistines?
7 months.
It's been there 7 months. You know, again, that's wonderful, perfect number, 7. You know, he's there 7 months. And what do the leaders of the Philistines end up deciding to do?
Called the priest.
Go to call the priests in.
divine.
Now, these are not priests, Israelite priests, they are Philistines. They got priests.
Diviners.
What's that?
Diviners.
Diviners, now, a diviner is someone who could predict the future. You know, a diviner would be someone who would slaughter a chicken and look at the entrails and say,
Yeah.
based on the way that stomach looks, I think we'll get rain on Thursday. You know, that's what a diviner did. Divination was interpreting signs. And understand, in a pre-rational time, they weren't stupid. In a pre-rational time, diviners worked because they knew what to look for. You know,
Yeah.
sometimes it seems really bizarre, but you know, that's what they did. And they must have been right enough, because if they were always wrong, then people wouldn't have listened to them.
Don't diviners find water?
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. How do you do it? Don't know. They just can't.
Yeah, wrong.
You know, that's right.
Yeah.
They just can't. And so that's what a diviner is. They're interpreting signs, and they decide that they need to get this ark out of town, right? And they need to send it. And how are they going to send this ark out? What do they say they need to do? You need to do.
A guilt
The
offering.
priest, you need, in other words, the priests are saying to the leaders, you should have asked us first before you took the ark. And you should feel really guilty for taking this ark. Because you guys screwed up because you messed with another guy. So you screwed up. And so what do the priests say? If you want to get this staying out of the Philistines, the land of the Philistines, not only do you need to send the ark back,
But you don't send it empty.
but don't send it empty-handed. You know, therefore, what should you? And these are really odd.
Yes.
What do they say you need to send with?
Tumors like
Gold.
I have no idea what this tumor looks like. You know what is?
and 5 gold wraps.
Yeah, which tells us a little bit about what the plague that infected them. You know, it was something not carried by rats, but carried by like fleas that are living on rats. So we're talking about something that may have been like bubonic plague, you know, something that people could have catch from the fleas on rats. So and they knew enough that so evidently they acquired a rat problem too. But they attributed this to the ark, and the writer does, so we don't need to worry about anything else. So we're going to put in tumors, and we're going to put in little rats, but we're going to make them out of gold. Which, I'm going to tell you something, when you give your wife and it's a beautiful gold pendant with a tumor, she is not all that excited. And it was really
Depends
nice.
how big that goes.
Well, it was a tiny little tumor. Yeah, it was a little teeny one. You know, I didn't want it to convey the wrong message that I want you to get. Yeah, and it doesn't help if you give them a rat either, a gold rat. Somehow that just doesn't work very well. So we're gonna send it back, and how are we gonna send it back?
On a cart.
Okay, we're gonna send it back on a cart, and once you get in past the border, right?
You've got them still on you.
Then you just turn it over to Israel. So what are the Philistines what are they doing by sending the ark back
I got some of it.
the way they are? They're expressing their grief, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because this is a grief, a guilt offering. Okay. And so what do the Philistines, the leaders, do?
Hitch cows to the cart.
They hitch interesting cows.
They just give it.
Because and how many? They do two, right? 2 cows that have just given birth, have just calved. And they even the writer mentions something about the calves. What do they do with the calves?
Take the calf from
They calves away. So we've got these 2 cows, milk cows, right? And they take the calves away from the milk cows, right?
Yeah.
Shut them off. Now, that's kind of interesting because the writer is choosing to tell us that. Therefore, again, there's got to be a reason. Okay, we'll hold that. We'll talk about it in a minute. So they take the calves away. We got these 2 milk calves. And what do they do with the 2 milk calves?
Hook them up to the cart.
They hook them up to the cart, and then what?
And then they put the ark in the cart.
They put the ark in the cart, and the tumors and the rats, and then what?
Send it out to
Way.
Okay, they send the 2 cows out. Holly, now this is odd because you wouldn't tie milk cows to a cart, right? You would use an ox or something else, but not milk cows that have just calved. So all of this is kind of odd, so we might want to think about it. And so we're going to put the cows to the cart, and we're going to send them down the road, right? Okay. And as they're going down the road, the writer tells us, what are these cows doing?
The calves are crying to their mothers, and I imagine the mothers are hurting because they have all that milk.
Okay, good. So the cows are lowing, you know, they're carrying all this milk as they just go, and the writer says they go straight down the road. Now, why milk cows? Why is this even mentioned, and why would it be so important that these details? What do these details? What may they show? Why is the writer including these in his story, in the account?
Is it a test of God to see if the cows would return home?
Ooh, very good. I mean, I think you're really onto something. You think about the cows have been separated from their calves. So what would be their natural inclination?
They're around to go back.
To go back. To go back to their calves. But what are the cows doing?
They went straight.
They're going straight in the opposite direction. They're going away. Now, what might that show?
That God was in
That God's
control
in,
of turning the ark.
that God's in control. That God's in control of the ark coming back. That these cows are moving against their natural inclination and moving forward away from their calves to take the ark home. So I think that is certainly involved here. I think that's certainly important, that this is a sign of God's authority, and that's what they knew. It's almost like if this truly does have power, the cows are going to make it there, or going to take it back. If it didn't, then the cows would do what? Go back to their calves.
Yeah.
Would go back to the calves. Now you said, and I think this is also part of it, you said those cows are going to be, if they're milk cows, those cows are going to be really hurting. they're going to be really hurting. And so when they are lowing as they go, these cows are,
Wanting their calves and they're hurting and get the milk.
yeah, they're in pain.
They're making a lot of noise.
You know, they're in pain. Now, why would that also be significant given what's happening
Well,
here?
that's what I don't understand. That was the one part I didn't understand.
What might it, again, symbolically mean? Why might it be significant, particularly for the Philistines? What might they be communicating
That they're mourning?
that morning? That they're in pain. You know, that these two cows represent what we're going through. That we're feeling this pain.
So would the calves be like a sacrifice?
They
Well,
did. They were.
the calves, we don't hear about the calves. You know, they kind of disappear. Now, what ends up happening with the calves,
They sacrifice them.
we don't know. But the cows
Or sacrifice.
are going to be sacrificed.
So that he can get it back to
You know,
the baby.
historically, would the calves have been probably not. I mean, we're talking about a time when livestock is incredibly valuable. I mean, it is really important. So whether they would allow the calves to die because their mothers were going, you know, these weren't stupid people. They knew how to deal with a calf whose mother wasn't there anymore. So I imagine the calves were okay, but the cows weren't. You know, and that becomes a sacrifice not to the Jews, but a sacrifice offered
From the Philistines?
from the Philistines. You know, that they are offering incredibly valuable, you know, their property, you know. So I think both are working. I don't think it's one versus the other. I think it's showing that God is directing, that they're moving, you know, because there's no mention that the Philistines are leading them. In fact, it talks about the Philistines following them. So they're leading, and they find their way back. Why would they do that? It's against their natural inclination. And they're also
Because God's
doing
in
it,
control.
God's in control, and they're feeling pain,
Yeah.
which is what the Philistines are certainly feeling. And when they get to the border, what happens to the Shemez, Beth Shemez? When Beth just means house, that's what it
She's
means.
harvesting the wheat in the valley.
Okay, they're harvesting, you know, so the people, when they get there, they're not expecting them to
Yeah.
come, they're just in the field. But when they see the
cart.
the cart with the ark on it, they are
Rejoicing.
really, really happy. Okay, and what do they do with and the Philistines kind of leave it there. What do they do?
Lead him beside a large rock where they put the, ark.
They get a big rock, right? And what else do they do?
Sacrifice the calves?
They sacrifice the two cows to God because the ark has made it
home.
home, right? And the lords of the Philistines that followed the cows, they see it and they do what?
Go home.
Go home. Oh, go home. And what is in the box? What do they find in the box?
The tumors and the rats.
They find the tumors and the rats representing the different cities.
Cities where everybody-
Okay. Now, and again, the writer says, if you question this story,
It's still there.
it's still there.
Yeah.
The rock that they did this on is still there. So, again,
Just
reminder
like
that
the
he's
rock-
writing.
The rock by the water.
Yes, when they crossed the Jordan.
Yeah.
The pile of rocks, when they did the 12 tribes. You know, they are still there. And that reminds us that the writer is sending this to people who are living later. You know, this is not a reporter writing it. This is someone shaping a story that's significant to people
It's
later.
all connected.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's what becomes fascinating, is this narrative that's being shaped as he brings these stories together. Now what happens? So we have this shift. The ark is back home. What ends up? Where does this go? Where does the story go from the ark getting home?
Well, that was the offering.
There's some people. There's a family that isn't happy that the ark is home. You know, they're like, you can compare them to Cleveland fans or Baltimore fans in Pittsburgh. they are not happy that the ark is home, right? Okay? And what happens to the family?
Struck down?
Jeconiah, his family is wiped out, right? Because he's not happy. Now, the people there in Beth Shemesh, they're kind of concerned, right? Because the ark is here and they lost a portion of their population, right?
Yeah.
And so they start feeling,
They don't want it there.
they don't want it there. They don't want the ark there anymore. Now, is that appropriate? That they say, we don't want the ark here?
No, it shouldn't be.
Well, where does the ark belong?
Oh, it belongs back where.
It belongs in Shiloh, and this is in Shiloh.
Yeah.
So the ark doesn't belong there. It belongs somewhere else. And so they want the ark going, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so what do they end up doing with the ark?
Well, they sent messages saying that the ark had been returned by the Philistines.
And what are we going to do with it?
Sent it home.
And where does it end up going?
They took it to Abinadab's house?
Abinadab
Yeah, okay.
takes it to his house,
Yeah.
and Abinadab does what?
He consecrated
Eleazar, his son,
to guard the ark.
and he's going to guard the ark. So now we've got the ark in a location, but the location isn't in Shiloh. It's not where it belongs. So we still got a problem here. Okay? All right. But we've got the ark, this whole story of the Philistines, right? And the ark is now back home. Now it's almost like we go to something entirely different, because in verse 3, we're reintroduced to somebody that we haven't seen in a while.
Samuel.
Okay, now we got Samuel. And what does Samuel do?
He says, if you're returning to the Lord with all your hearts, then rid yourself of the foreign gods.
Now, what then does it appear that Israel is doing? What does it appear by what Samuel says? So all of a sudden we got this whole business with the Philistines all the way back to the first and second battle, where the leaders of the Israelites say, if we have the ark, it'll lead us to victory and all this stuff. And then boom, in verse 3, we're back to Samuel. And if we take that whole story of the Philistines out and just set it aside, this flows from verse 1 in chapter 4, where Samuel's a prophet. And then right here in verse 3, Samuel's doing what? He's doing what a prophet does. He's talking to the house of Israel. So, and it would appear in what he says that Israel is doing what? Again, which isn't a shock. They are worshiping false gods. They're worshiping idols, right? And Samuel, which is who does the kind of thing Samuel's doing here? We've seen this happen before. Who does this kind of thing? Who brings this kind of message? Judges do. This is the typical judge pattern. Now, we said that pattern wasn't reflected in the story of the Philistines because the Israelites seemed to show some faith when they said, we lost the battle we lost because God didn't want us to win. That didn't seem like a judge's pattern. This does. So it's like we got a story that's here, must be there for a reason. We'll find the reason later. But here we kind of now back into this Samuel story, that he's been out for a while and now he's kind of back in. The whole Philistine is going to serve some purposes, but we're not there yet. We're going to see that later. Some of it much later. Okay, so he challenges them to do what? You can't worship idols, right?
Yes.
And what does Samuel do at Mizpah?
Intercede.
Okay. All of a sudden, we got Israel gathered, which we haven't seen Israel gathered. If we take especially the Philistine story out, we didn't see it in Judges. We had bits and pieces. Now we got Israel all gathered at Mizpah. And what does he do in Mizpah?
He drew water.
He drew water. Now, why is that so significant that he's drawing water at Mizpah?
Because water's hard to find.
Well, and particularly at Mizpah, remember Mizpah in the story in Numbers is where Moses hit the rock and water came. That was the miracle of Mizpah. And so water again is important here. And it says he judges the people, right? And what do the people say?
We've sinned against.
We have sinned against God. Okay, so we've got this same kind of judges pattern, only now what people are we dealing with? The Philistines, right? So who responds? Who hears that the Jews are gathered at Mizpah?
The Philistines.
The Philistines. Now, we've got no mention in this of the fact that they defeated, the Israelites twice, no mention of the ark, no mention of the 2 cows. It's like that story didn't exist because as the person is putting these stories together to make a narrative, it didn't. So we've got the Philistines, right? And what do the Philistines do?
They attack them.
Okay, when they hear that the Israelites have gathered at Mizpah, they are going to attack. Okay, they are going to attack. And what does Israel do?
They're afraid.
Okay, they are afraid, and so in their fear, what do?
They asked Samuel.
Samuel, you need to do something. Now, is this Samuel, if Samuel is a judge, then he's going to do something, because that's what judges do. They lead the people and defeat the people's enemies, right? And so what does Samuel do?
He took a lamb.
He sacrifices a lamb, which is kind of interesting, because remember, Samuel's not a Levite. He's not a Levite. Remember, Hannah was from the hill country of Ephraim. So he's not a Levite, but here he performs a sacrifice, right? Burnt offering. And what happens when he performs his
While he was
sacrifice?
sacrificing the burnt offering, the Philistines drew nearer to engage Israel in battle.
Okay, what happens? Because something incredible happens.
The Lord answered.
The Lord answers, and how does he answer?
Thunder.
Yeah, through thunder. This isn't the kind of the still small voice that Elijah hears when he sees God. This is thunder, right? And when God thunders, what ends up happening to the Philistines?
Dead.
They panicked.
They are panicked, and what does the Israelites, what do? Attack them, and they conquer them, right? So who is responsible for the victory? God is. What is the role of Samuel?
He cried out to them and intercede.
He appears to be playing the role of as a judge, right? And typical in a typical judge story, what's the result of that? And he sets up a stone as a sign of their victory. And what is the result?
He named a stone.
He gives the stone a name. Why would he give the name a stone? Ebenezer.
Ebenezer.
Why would he give the stone a name? What does that stone represent?
Because the Lord helped him.
The Lord helped him. So this is where God helps us. Why would you put it up as a stone? My gosh, why would we put a statue in this before city building? Why would you do that? It's a reminder of,
Everybody can see.
that everybody can see, reminder of what happened in the past. Okay, and the result of all this is what?
Through Samuel's lifetime.
Well, even before that, what happens to the Philistines?
They were subdued.
They were subdued.
Okay, they are subdued.
And they didn't invade Israelite territory again.
Right, so the territory of Israel is preserved, and there's peace with the Amorites, and life in Israel is good. And what happens with Samuel?
He continued as a judge all the days of his life.
And as judge, what does he do? As a judge, what does he end up doing?
Well, from year to year, he went on the circuit.
Okay, he goes on a circuit. And what's his circuit?
Bethel, Gilgal, Mizpah.
Okay, he stops in these places, right? And what is he doing in these places?
He judges Israel.
Okay, he becomes, and when it says judge, he's administering the court. He is a judge. He's administering justice, right? Okay, and at Ramah, and he builds an altar there. So we've got Israel at peace. We've got another judge that frees them, right? Okay. Now, if this is where it ended, who is ruling Israel?
His sons?
Well, who is, right here in this story, who is the ruler of Israel?
Sam.
Samuel, is Samuel the ruler, or is Samuel, oh God, Samuel's work had been called by somebody else. So Samuel is not a king, right? He's a judge, a representative of God that God has called, right, to administer, things. Now, if you have that kind of government, that's called a theocracy, based on two good Greek words, theos, God, and archeos is a Greek word for king. So when God is king, that's a theocracy. If you have a monarchy, you have one person as king. So you've got a theocracy now here. God is ruling the people through the judge Samuel. But remember, in Judges, when they didn't have a king, people were running around. And I told you one of the tensions that we see in Samuel is this tension between the kind of theocracy that's described here and a monarchy with a human being in charge that would calm people down. Having a person in charge would prevent people from running around crazy. And you've got this, so you have this tension. And we're going to see that tension resolve itself in chapters 8 through 10. And that's what we'll look at next week. Because remember, one of the goals in the books of Samuel is, particularly 1 Samuel, we're moving towards a guy named David, who is ultimately going to be king and going to be important for Israel. How does David end up becoming king when Samuel is ruling as a representative of God with no king at all, and is administering justice without a monarch? Okay, that tension is going to resolve itself next time. But again, if we look at these stories, what do these stories really tell us? What message does this have to the readers of the story back in the day and to us now as we read the story? God is in control. God is in control. And human beings may think they're in control and may do stuff that would indicate they're in control, but the reality is God is in control. And even if we don't fully understand it, God is in control. Okay.
Who are the priests at this time? Eli is dead, his sons are dead. Do we have anybody that priesthood, the line of priests?
You don't need one. Why wouldn't you need a priest anymore, a high priest? Because the ark is sitting in somebody's garage. Really, that's what it is. He's taken him to his house. The Ark of the Covenant is now, because those are some loose ends we've got. Things that we can expect the writer to develop. Because he wouldn't introduce it if it wasn't the purpose. We've got some loose ends. We got the son of a priest, right? Whose name is Ichabod, who is out there, right? So he's there. And we've got the Ark of the Covenant not where it belongs, in the tabernacle in Shiloh. We got the Ark of the Covenant in Abinadab's garage, with his son consecrated to guard it. But we ain't got worshiping happening there. So without the Ark, the tabernacle ceases to have significance. And that's why Samuel is doing his work from Ramah. He isn't doing his judging in Shiloh.
He built an altar.
He builds an altar. So you can perform, they're going to perform sacrifices, but it won't be the sacrifices they perform in Shiloh. So you don't, evidently there isn't that priesthood. What we're going to see later, but that's another loose end. that we don't have that, we're going to see that change, because there's going to be a new priesthood that's going to be established, but not until the ark is where it belongs. And the ark isn't where it belongs yet. So these are loose ends. This guy is too good a writer to have those loose ends just hanging around. He's going to tie them up, but not yet. That's going to be later in the story. Any other questions? These are good narratives. These are really good narratives. And you're talking about ancient people writing it. They were good. I mean, they really were good in how they could shape stories. Okay.
Trying to put this in here, and it's not.
Oh, and she's looking at you
Yeah,
as you
I
do
know.
it. She's staring at you as you do it. All right, let's have a word of prayer, and then she can finally get something to eat.
Oh,
Since
yeah,
she's been starving this whole time with no attention, she can finally have lunch. Lord God, thank you so much for giving us this time together, and bless us as we go about our living. Remind us that regardless of how things appear, and even regardless of how we choose to respond, you're still in charge. And although we may pay the consequences, both good and bad, for the actions we take, help us to trust that you are still in charge of our narrative. And in the end, the result, our place will be glorious, because we believe you love us. So help us keep our focus on you. Help us to look to you for direction and guidance. In the name of Christ we pray. Amen.
Amen.